Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question. Actually, he's asked this a couple times. I'm going to flip it in. He's basically asking what's the difference between ramped sets versus straight sets. Because he notices a lot of your elite football players, NFL players, people like that do ramp sets, but a lot of people advocate straight sets because they say it gives you better tonnage and things like that. So what's the difference? What's going on here? Alright, so let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing. Work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. This is a good question. For those who don't know the difference here, straight sets means all of your sets with an exercise you use the same weight. If you're doing 5x5 or 3x10, it doesn't matter. If you're working with 200 pounds on the first work set, you go ahead and you work with 200 pounds on all the sets for all 5 sets of 5 or 3 sets of 10 or whatever it is you happen to be doing. Ramped sets generally involve building to a peak set. So the difference there, let's say 5x5s are a perfect example. A lot of bodybuilding style 5x5s, such as the novice program I have, you do sets across. Whereas in something like Bill Starr's, you ramp it up. Bill Starr wrote his 4 football players, and a lot of NFL players have run Bill Starr's 5x5, which means, again, you ramp it up. It works off percentages. And if I recall on Bill Starr's, a lot of times he has you go 10% increases on each set till you build to a peak set where you think should be close to your 5 rep max. And then you're done with it. So why do these things work differently? What's going on? Why would you choose one over the other? Well, some of it's going to depend upon goals, where you're at in your training, and some of it is going to depend upon experience level. All right, experience level as a lifter. Straight sets usually are better for accumulating fatigue. All right, you're building up fatigue, you're building up metabolites, building up workload for the purposes of hypertrophy, building more muscle mass. Now, when we start talking about, again, hypertrophy versus strength, you cannot separate the two. And that's something I cannot highlight enough. Meaning you could come in and do nothing but 5 sets of 10 on exercises, gain muscle, and your 1 rep max will go up. People need to understand that. You cannot build muscle without gaining strength, and vice versa. You can't build very much strength without building muscle mass. The exception being changes in neural efficiency, neuromuscular efficiency, but the thing is, even if you increase neuromuscular efficiency, and so you can recruit more muscle fibers, that will equal more growth eventually because you're putting more workload on the muscles. They're going to be forced to grow, even if it's your nervous system causing the additional muscle fiber recruitment. Those fibers are going to get recruited as you're lifting. So you can't completely separate them. You can only have a slight bias towards them. All right, accumulating fatigue like that tends to be very, very good for hypertrophy. So you would think about something like that, if it might yield a slight advantage towards gaining muscle over gaining overall strength. Peak sets, on the other hand, are generally used when you are trying to build strength. You're trying to build, again, neuromuscular efficiency. You're trying to train your nervous system to lift a heavier weight. The difference is, of course, when you're doing peak sets, you're going to end up with a little less total tonnage per workout. Again, doesn't matter whether we're talking 3x10 or 5x5. Again, I don't want people to get this confused and think we're talking about just 5x5s here, but it's just easy to use those as a reference. Because what you'll find on something like Bill Starr's, because only maybe your 4th out of the 5 sets is going to be equal to what you would get on a straight sets across 5x5, and then the next one up is only about 10% more. If you think about it, the others are lower. 3 out of the 5 sets are lower than you would get in terms of total weight on the bar for those reps. So ultimately, you would move less tonnage. It is going to accumulate less overall metabolic fatigue. Well, less overall metabolic fatigue isn't always ideal for muscle growth. You're still going to grow. Still probably going to grow very, very well on it. But you are shifting the bias towards handling one heavy peak set. Whether 5 reps, 8 reps, whatever it is you're happening to do. Again, a lot of strength athletes are going to try to do peak sets with like 5 reps. A lot of power lifters down with 3s or even singles. But like a field athlete, like a football player, a 5 rep set, it could be an 8 rep set also, is generally where they're going to go with something like that. Now, what we're noticing here when you stop and think about that, what's the difference with experience level? Well, just like he said, a lot of NFL players run peak sets. He mentioned also some really top pro bodybuilders he's seen over the years run peak sets. What does that guys tell you about peak sets? Who's doing these peak sets? People with many years of training experience. That's who's doing this. People who are very competitive in some competitive endeavor. Well, that means they're probably advanced lifters. You see a lot more straight sets done on novice programs, like my novice 5x5, my linear hypertrophy program. Those are perfect examples. I have everyone doing straight sets. Why is there a tendency to have novices do straight sets instead of peak sets? Well, simply put, because novices are usually not strong enough to stimulate ideal amounts of growth sometimes off of a peak set. All right, and they're going to get stronger no matter what they do. By getting in more total tonnage, by doing straight sets, you can make a novice grow a little faster. Someone in their first year of serious training, you're going to make them grow faster because they handle more tonnage better than stronger lifters. What we need to remember there, like we say before, your experience level, novice, intermediate, advanced, depends on how much tonnage you can move probably per minute. How strong you are, how much workload can you subject your body to in a unit of time. That's a strength component. Novices aren't strong enough to generally easy overtrain with workload or workload density. So you can have them do a lot of straight sets that will accumulate fatigue, right? It will accumulate metabolic fatigue, which will stimulate a lot of muscle growth. Because novice lifters generally don't have amazing neuromuscular efficiency, even moderately heavy weights that they can do multiple sets with without hitting muscle failure is still moderately heavy enough, and it reinforces good form with a lot of moderately heavy reps, because 5 sets of 5 or 3 sets of 10 is 25 to 30 reps. Now you're doing those with a weight you can handle without shaking, without form breakdown, things like that. So you're getting in a lot of repetition with a moderately heavy weight that will reinforce good form, because a novice lifter doesn't always have good form. They don't have good neuromuscular efficiency. You're reinforcing that over and over and over because they're not doing peak sets. Because peak sets, you got to remember, a lot of those are lighter reps. A lot of those are lighter reps when you're ramping to peak sets. They may not always be ingraining the form under a moderately heavy load yet. And the novice lifter is going to benefit in terms of technique more, and they're going to benefit in terms of more total tonnage, because you got to remember, it's harder for them to really generate enough tonnage to overtrain. Novice lifters don't overtrain easily because they're not strong enough to actually push their body that far. For the slightly more advanced lifter, or as you get more advanced, because a lot of intermediate programs out there still run peak sets. You start seeing the intermediate football programs, intermediate powerlifter programs. They start putting them on peak sets. That's usually where you see them worked in. Well, it's because as someone gets more advanced, they can push their body to the point with tonnage to where they can overtrain. So straight sets aren't generally used for the big exercises. They're not generally used for the big exercises as much because those people are capable of pushing themselves too hard with total tonnage. And their neuromuscular efficiency is high enough that they can really stimulate some decent growth off of a peak set. Both size and strength can be gained fairly easy off of a peak set, particularly because it's heavier. It's going to help them work on getting overall a lot stronger, but because the tonnage is moved even off of a single set for them, especially those final 2 sets ramping up, is actually going to be a fair amount of tonnage. And what do I mean? Compare the novice lifter who's squatting 200 pounds for 5 sets of 5, who's working up towards being an intermediate. All right, what about the guy who can squat 455 for a 5 rep set? You see the difference? His single peak set was actually more tonnage than the first 2 sets of the more novice lifter who's doing 200 pounds combined together. He is over doubling the tonnage off of a single set. So he is able to stimulate more growth and more stress on his body off of a single set than they were able to off of 2. So there's a lot more to be said for those individual sets for them, but the more advanced lifter will still tend to do their accessory work, their lighter work sometimes with straight sets. They don't always do peak sets. So for example, let's say they're doing a bench and overhead press on whatever day or for whatever part of the program. If they're doing the bench as a primary exercise, they might do straight sets on the overhead press. If they're doing both as primary exercises, let's say you've got a football player who's doing ramps up to a peak set of 5 on the bench press, then a peak set of 5 on the overhead press. And then he does, say, floor press or some incline dumbbell bench press for accessory work. He might come in and do 3 sets of 8 with those with straight sets across. So what you generally find, the accessory work is still going to be done with sets across because it's not as critical. You're not trying to build peak power with that. You're just trying to get more metabolic fatigue. You're trying to build muscle, more muscle up with that, while you allow the primary exercises to be your primary maximum strength stimulator. Then you use the accessory work the same way. So you would still be doing sets across. But generally speaking, the novice is going to get a lot more out of doing just straight sets on everything, simply because they're not strong enough yet to really benefit the same from doing peak sets. And they're going to get a lot more perfect form and perfect repetition over and over and over off straight sets, which is going to make them better at their technique. And better technique means better muscle fiber recruitment over time. It's going to be more tonnage moved for them, and it's just going to stimulate more growth. As they're less fear of overtraining, you're not as worried about excessive tonnage yet with them. Whereas with a more advanced lifter, excessive tonnage can become an overtraining problem very, very quickly. So hopefully that makes sense as to why people would use the different ones. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.